In this video, we'll look at getting and keeping attention. How do you get your audience's attention and how do you keep it? So first of all, about getting attention. Getting attention, the beginning of your talk. Many groups begin, and many people in different contexts giving presentations begin with an outline. And then they talk about what they're going to say, and then they give a conclusion. So it's like, I'm going to tell you this, now I'm telling you what I told you. Kind of boring. So how can you make it better? Maybe this is useful if you have a very long presentation, like a workshop. Several hours broken into different parts, the audience needs to know what's coming. That's very useful. However, in something like a thesis defense, a conference, people know the expectation and you only have 15 minutes. Don't waste your time with an outline when people know what's coming. Similarly for iGEM. iGEM, there's a basic format that's expected. You have a short time. And how many of these are the judges listening to? You need to somehow catch their attention at the beginning. What is it that sets your project apart from the rest? So just like at the beginning of an article, you begin with motivation. Why are we doing this? Start with something that grabs their attention, an interesting story. One iGEM team that was working on African swine fever began by talking about a news story of dead pigs washing up on the shore of Jingmen. That was worthwhile because I hadn't heard about it. Statistics. A group that was working on paper cup liners talked about the billions of paper cups that are produced in Taiwan every year, and the fact that, unlike what we might think, they're not recyclable. That was something that grabbed people's attention. So start with something that grabs their attention. You suggested that they should respond to 3 different questions.
Just think from the audience perspective. When they see a presentation, they want to ask 3 questions. First, they may say, I know it already. What's new? Why should I pay attention to it? Then you need to convince them what's new about your work. But then they'll say, you look very incompetent, not very confident. Do you have anything worth my attention? Anything that's authoritative, accurate enough, worth my attention? I don't believe what you're going to present. So, why should we consider you as an expert? Why do I need to spend the next 20 minutes listening to this information? And then the third question is, no matter what you say, I just think, I don't care. It's not relevant to me. Why should I know anything about this topic? So you need to convince me. Why is it important to me?
Okay. So those are all important in motivation. What's new about your work? Why do you know something about it that we don't? And why is it important to me? So make sure that you try to include those early in your presentation so you grab the audience's attention. Another thing that a lot of groups do, which is not very useful, is to put a list of abbreviations at the beginning. Now, that's common in research articles, because in research articles, if you're reading an article and you don't know, you flip back to the beginning, you know where it is, but you can't do that in a presentation. So what do? I suggest that you put both the abbreviation and the full name on the slide each time. That way, if the audience knows the abbreviation, fine. If they don't, they can just read the full description there. So the first time that you talk about it, for instance, if you're talking about light-emitting diodes, LEDs, the first time that you talk about them, you would say, I'm going to talk about light-emitting diodes, also called LEDs. And then in subsequent times when you talk about them, you just call them LEDs. But you also have light-emitting diode on the screen so that if people forget what that is, they can just look at the screen and be reminded.
In other words, you need to be reader friendly,
Right. Or audience friendly. In
audience
this
friendly
case.
too.
Right. So once you've got their attention, how do you keep their attention? Well, one thing that's important in, again, team presentations is to speak as a team.
I think when we present as a team, it's very much like singing in chorus. But many times when students do group presentations, they seem to be doing several solos. Each say, I am John, I'm going to sing the following. I'm Mary, I'm going to sing the next. Then why should I listen to several solos? I need to hear a group presentation. I need to hear a good chorus.
Okay, so all of them need to be closely connected to one another, again, by working together on one purpose, one goal. Also, as you're speaking, don't speak about each slide. The slide should be the background. Speak through the slides, not about them. Because speaking, again, is different than reading. The visuals on the slide should supplement the talk, not substitute for it. If they can just read the slides and know everything, why should you be there? Why do they need a speaker? Just give them a written document.
In other words, you are telling a story from one point to the next. And as you go along, this visual aid provides the background for you. But not this slide says this, the next slide says that.
Right.
That interrupts. That doesn't provide a smooth transition.
And then in terms of the text on the slide, if I put something like this sentence on the slide, writing one main point per line makes it easier for your readers, because if you write a sentence, they will be reading it instead of listening to you. Well, as soon as I put that on the slide, you're going to start reading it. And then, again, why do you need to listen to me? But there may be something in there that's most important. If you can't shorten it, it's some sort of a quote or something that you can't shorten, you can still highlight with color something that will draw your audience's attention to the main point so that they can know that it's part of this context, but this is really what you want to focus on.
One solution to this is not to write the full paragraph, the whole sentences like that,
Right.
to avoid reading word by word.
So it's better, if you can, to simplify it into bullet points instead of paragraphs, so that there's one main point for every line of text. This breaks it into chunks that makes it easier for the reader. Another thing that you can do if you have to have a longer text is to consider the alignment. Let me show you an example here. If I put these two things and you look at these two examples, it's exactly the same words. I'm going to show 10 abbreviations for 30 seconds and hope you remember them 15 minutes later. But which one is easier to read and remember? I would say the second one, because you have 10 abbreviations, 30 seconds, 15 minutes. Each of those is on one line rather than split over two lines. So you have natural units, and those chunks of information that you need to remember are on single lines. And that makes it easier visually to focus on those chunks of information.
For me, if you simply put 10 abbreviations, 30 seconds, and 15 minutes, that would be even better for me to remember.
Right. But I'm saying if you need to focus on the whole text for some reason, you can still consider the placement on the line to make it easier for you. Another thing that you can do to keep your attention or keep your audience's attention is not put too much information on the slide at one time. Bring on words or graphics as you need them, as you're going to talk about them. And you do this via animations. You can put on a sentence and then circle the important word with what's called a donut, or highlight something with a frame, or use an arrow to point to the important information. All of these are things that draw your audience's attention, as well as the use of color, to main points. And by using with previous or after previous, in the animations function, you can cause these to come on with a single click. That saves your attention, and it makes it faster and keeps your audience's attention better. But again, remember with these animations, the purpose is to focus attention, not distract attention. Don't use too many, don't use too wild. Just like we talked about before, they should be semiotic. They should have a meaning. So for instance, with a process, if you want to show a process, you can bring on step 1 and then a wipe arrow that shows it moving to step 2, and then fade that on after the previous, and then another arrow and fade to show going into step 3. And this will show very clearly the process of moving from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Motion paths are something that a lot of people don't know about that can also be very effective, where you can show the movement of an object across the screen using these animations. Then there are also transitions. A lot of people just cut from one slide to the next. But if you use a fade, that tends to convey that there's a continuity. And then when it comes time to turn the audience's attention to something new, to a new topic, you can use a different transition that will highlight that. But make sure that you do these when the presentation is nearly complete, because any new slides that you add after that won't have the transition.
And sometimes people use dramatic transitions, like open the door, and after a while, you are gonna faint after watching that too many times.
Right, which is why you use a more dramatic transition 2 or 3 times during your presentation at most to show a major transition rather than from one slide to the next. So you're talking about topic A, you use a fade to maintain continuity as you keep talking about that. And then as you want to turn attention to a new topic, then you can use a more dramatic transition. Particularly, I find the idea of turning or covering or something like that can be very effective in turning the audience's attention to a new topic. Finally, think about timing. Generally, 1 to 2 slides per minute is good. So if you have a 15-minute presentation, you're looking at 15 to 30 slides. Why? Well, maybe you have a 20-minute talk and you have 100 slides. Do the math. That comes out to 12 seconds per slide. Click, click, click. Wait, I didn't even see what was on the previous slide. People will just feel they're racing. They can't keep up with you. On the other, if you have a 20-minute talk and you only have 10 slides, which I've seen, you better be a pretty good talker or your audience is going to think, when is this going to end? So keep that in mind as a general principle. Again, you don't have to use the same timing for each slide, but make sure that it keeps moving so your audience's attention stays focused on the presentation. Another final point, if you can, use presenter view. Presenter view allows you to see the notes, it allows you to see the total time elapsed, it allows you to see the next slide, so you can remember, do you have something else that you're adding to this slide, or are you going on to the next slide? That will help you to maintain continuity in your presentation.